So Good Time, heavily hyped movie of the past 6 months or so. A couple months ago, started coming out theatrically. Now it's coming out on home video and streaming and whatever. Hyped up independent film starring Robert Pattinson. I've seen it and all I gotta say is believe the hype. This is one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. One of the best new movies. Robert Pattinson's performance. I mean, the trailer. A lot of times, the trailers these days are so deceptive. They come at night. I mean, it's just so many independent films have these little deceptive and I understand why they're deceptive, and sometimes they need to be deceptive, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with being deceptive. I'm not laying a trip on it. But Good Time, the trailer for Good Time, if you watch the trailer for Good Time, that trailer, is excellent, and the movie is as excellent as the trailer. The trailer really works. You get to see a little bit of Robert Pattinson's performance as this wisecracking brother, this wise ass brother of this guy, and it's kind of like Mice and Men. And it's a running through the night film. It's one of those movies where you got a bunch of characters running through Babysitter's Day Out, Day Off, whatever. The Scorsese film, you can tell I've really... the Scorsese film about running around at night, Miracle Mile. So there's a lot of running around at night movies. And this is another in the loose... what do you call it, subgenre of running around at night movies in the city. Running around at night in New York, basically. And I always liked these movies, but what I loved about Good Time is that it had this. It felt like this kind of the cinema verite, the shooting off of these very long lenses with these very tight close-ups of people, the reality, the grittiness of it. I mean, it is stylized. There's parts of it that felt like kind of like a European art film. The idea, the kind of the colors and the look of it and the design of it felt like this might be you could remake this movie in Paris, and in the late 80s and early 90s, and have some hotshot French director do it, and it would be just as valid a movie. It has this kind of Euro kind of feel to it in one sense, but in another sense it's very American also in another way. And it also, there were parts of me that just watching it, I felt like it was like Kids, but like 20 years or 30 years later. Kids, the next generation, that Larry Clark's film Kids. It felt like that, but it felt like it was Kids without like the Larry Clark kind of leering sleaze of, a Larry Clark movie. It felt like the Safdies, the Safdie brothers who made this film were into it for other things. As I said, the direction, impeccable, touches of European style, the use of what seemed to be non-actors, and mixing them in with traditional actors, is kind of mixing them in this kind of potpourri is very interesting. You're kind of looking at some of these characters. Is the bail bondsman, is he real, or is it live, or is it Memorex? Is he a real actor, or is it a trained actor, or is he just some guy dragged off the street, And it's this weird mix of people, and these discoveries and these faces and these voices that gives the film this kind of energy. At the core of the film, though, is Robert Pattinson, who, again, I'm not a Robert Pattinson fan. I have not consciously avoided Robert Pattinson, but I'm just not into the whole young adult Twilight, sparkly vampire thing. But he definitely breaks out of that with this film. It's very obvious he was wanting to do something completely, off the board. Like a lot of his choices, like the David Cronenberg film and so on, is like, okay, I want to get as far away from that as possible, and he has, and he pulls it off, man. This character that he plays in this film, this this guy who was, you know, in a way, a very realistic character. The guy with a million different schemes, you know, different schemes for money and prosperity, who always ends up dragging people into his muck, into his problems, and you know, making people's lives that much worse. He's like the reverse of somebody who kind of goes around and enriches people's lives. The character in this film actually goes around and just kind of starts fundamentally screwing up pretty much everyone's life that he makes worse. He causes them you know, physical bodily harm, to be imprisoned. You know, everyone everything he touches turns to garbage. It seems like, but he's just this character, this driving character who is driving through the night, and he's just one of those characters so interesting to look at. His obsession, his sweaty, passionate obsession and schemes, the scheming that he goes through. It's so fun. It's an exuberant film. It's an exuberant film to watch, but it's not ultra slimy. You know, it's not really what I would call NC-17. It's not that. It's like one of those movies. It's like I felt touches of the European art film. I also felt touches of Tony Scott. Sorry, I mean Ridley. Tony Scott. You know, like the way he would shoot in you know, scope and Panavision with these tight lenses and doing all this stuff. Man, toward the end, it got a little bit excessive and crazy. But the early Tony Scott films, you know, how they were just so exuberant. It felt to me like touches of Tony Scott. Like Tony Scott has to remake Larry Clark's Kids, but the kids are not teenagers right now. They're like, you know, 20 years older. So there it is, scene. You know, I also thought about Kids, because I also thought about the guy who played Casper in Kids, the guy who I believe took his own life. He would have been great for that role, for the role of the guy that Robert Pattinson you know, tags along with. I thought that would have been a great role for him, but the guy, you know, I mean, again, all the actors and the performers that surround Robert Pattinson, the actors and the non-actors are incredible. One of the things that is incredible, that is mind-blowing about the film, is the soundtrack. The soundtrack is touches of Tangerine Dream, and Giorgio Moroder. The one main track, Good Time, it reminds me a hell of a lot of something Tangerine Dream out of Sorcerer. You know, the guy, I'm just gonna slaughter the name. This long-term, you know, ambient electronic music composer. His soundtrack for this film is a driving, you know, you will walk out of this movie, if you're a fan of electronic music, you know, running to the music store to buy that soundtrack, or running to whatever the streaming music store to stream it. It is that good of a soundtrack. Yeah, I mean, I haven't had this good a time at a new film, I think, in years. I mean, it really is a good movie, exuberant film. If you like running through the night films, right? And if you also like White Castle, because they bring up White Castle, and I miss White Castle. You know, there's no White Castles in Austin, in the Texas, and really, man, in the southeast Texas area, it's like the closest White Castle or Krystal. Really, I grew up on Krystal, you know, which is about the same, except essentially identical. The little burgers, you know, and you get little onions, you get little, oh my God, you get a little mustard. Oh God. The White Castle is incredible. Oh man. And you know that you can get the White Castle burgers like frozen, but they're not good. They're not, I've tried even after you got to eat you got to eat Krystal and White Castle when you get the damn burgers. Even if you get a sack of Krystals or a sack of White Castle, you try to put them in the refrigerator, you take them out and even you microwave it. That's what the freeze dried ones taste like. They're not good. They get soggy, they get weird, and they're soggy when they come out, but they're fresh. And there's just such a goodness and a freshness to those. I don't care if you don't like them. You're missing something. You're missing something out of life. White Castle burgers, Krystal. Well, I mean, I grew up in Krystal's the South. The White Castle, the South. By the way, I don't. People probably White Castle people don't know about Krystal. Krystal people don't know about White Castle. I'm telling you, we need to come together. It's like WGN Superstation, in Chicago. People in Chicago think that they have they're only the people who have WGN, but meanwhile, all the else of the country has WGN. So we all have WGN. Some people have White Castle. Some people have Krystal. But in Southie, I think the closest what was the closest Krystal or White Castle? It's like hours and hours and hours and hours away. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's a market that somebody could go in and make a killing. White Castle, Krystal, in the Austin, Texas. It was such a hipster area. Everybody's got hipster, artisanal, this and that. Meanwhile, you want to buy a little burger. Oh, sorry, why don't you get a slider? Why don't you go to whatever BJ's Brew House or some? No, not a slider. It's a Krystal. It's a nice cheap burger. You buy a sack of them. It's wonderful. You may class as a slider, okay? You may class as a slider, but it's still it's a cheap, nice burger. You have a ton of them, and it's about enjoyment. I don't know why this turned into but there's a scene where they go to White Castle. And I'm thinking about it ever since when I think about the movie Good Time, I think about Krystals. I think about, boy, when's the last time I had it? It's been, oh my God. Well, it's been about maybe 8 or 9 months, because I did go to the supermarket and I did get the freeze-dried White Castles, and that was a mistake. Those things. And the regular Krystals, they do kind of go through your tummy rather hard. They take the scenic route through your tummy. They're not that great, but the frozen ones seem like war. And then you gorge on them because you're like, oh my God, this is the first time I've had this burger in like a decade. Not really, but this is the first time I've had this burger in years. And you just, and they're freezing. There's something to a fresh Krystal burger that is just, you can't be beat. I don't know. So Krystal is good. I'm sure I've had White Castle frozen. White Castle's good. About the same as Krystal. Good Time is an incredible film.